young CEO driving his luxury BMW stopped at the same traffic light every morning for 3 months, completely indifferent to the world around him. But when a college student selling roses to pay for her tuition approached his car with a smile that could light up the darkest day, everything changed in an instant. What happened next will make you believe that love really can find you when you least expect it. Before we dive into this incredible story of unexpected love, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from and whether you believe that true love can happen at first sight. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button to help us share these uplifting stories with more people who need a reminder that love is all around us. This story came to us through our community of viewers who share their real-life experiences. And while we've changed some names to protect privacy, every detail of this beautiful love story happened exactly as we're about to tell you. Alexander Stone had built his empire on precision, predictability, and profit margins. At 28, he was the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 tech company, and his daily routine was as perfectly calibrated as the algorithms his company created. Every morning at exactly 8:47 a.m., his midnight blue BMW would pull up to the traffic light at the intersection of 5th and Madison, where he'd spend exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds waiting for the light to change. Alexander used those 2 minutes and 15 seconds productively, answering emails, reviewing reports, making calls. He had trained himself to ignore everything outside his climate-controlled, leather-seated bubble. The homeless man on the corner, the street musicians, the vendors selling newspapers. They were all just background noise in his perfectly orchestrated life. But on this particular Tuesday morning in October, something was different. A young woman with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail approached his car. She wore a simple white t-shirt, dark jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. In her arms, she carried a bundle of red roses wrapped in clear plastic, and despite the early morning chill, her face radiated a warmth that seemed to cut through the gray autumn day. Elena Martinez had been selling roses at this intersection for exactly 3 months, ever since her financial aid had been cut and she'd realized that her part-time job at the campus bookstore wasn't going to cover both her tuition and her mother's medical bills. Every morning, she'd buy 24 roses from the wholesale market for $24 and sell them for $5 each, hoping to make enough to keep her dreams alive. She'd noticed the BMW and its serious-looking driver from her very first day. He never rolled down his window, never made eye contact, never even acknowledged her existence. But there was something about him that intrigued her. Maybe it was the way his shoulders tensed when he was on a particularly stressful call, or the way he'd sometimes pause and stare at nothing, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. This morning, Elena decided to try something different. Instead of simply holding up a rose and hoping for acknowledgement, she approached his car and gently tapped on the passenger window. Alexander looked up from his phone, annoyed at the interruption. Through the tinted glass, he could see the rose seller, the same one who'd been here every morning for weeks. He'd noticed her persistence, her unfailing politeness even when people ignored her, but he'd never really looked at her. Not really. Now, looking directly at her face for the first time, Alexander felt something shift inside his chest. She had the most genuine smile he'd ever seen, and her eyes, warm brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of kindness he'd forgotten existed, were looking directly at him with hope rather than desperation. Elena mouthed through the glass, "Good morning. Beautiful roses today." For reasons he couldn't explain, Alexander found himself rolling down his window. "Good morning," Elena said, her voice carrying a slight accent that he couldn't quite place. "I have the most beautiful roses today. Each one was picked fresh this morning, and I promise they smell like happiness." Alexander stared at her for a moment. In his world of corporate executives and board meetings, no one had ever promised him that anything smelled like happiness. "How much?" he heard himself asking. $5, Elena replied, then quickly added, "But honestly, they're worth so much more than that. These roses could make someone's entire day better." Alexander reached for his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "I'll take for then." Elena's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this helps." She carefully selected the 4 most perfect roses from her bundle and handed them through the window. Are these for someone special? Alexander took the roses, their soft petals brushing against his fingers. When was the last time he'd held flowers? When was the last time he'd bought anything for someone special? When was the last time he'd had someone special to buy things for? No, there's no one special, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Elena's expression softened. Well then, these roses are for you. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we deserve beautiful things too. The light turned green, and cars behind Alexander began honking. But for the first time in his perfectly scheduled life, Alexander didn't care about being precisely on time. What's your name? He called out as he prepared to drive away. Elena Martinez. I'm Alexander Stone. It's nice to meet you, Alexander Stone. I hope those roses bring you some happiness today. As Alexander drove away, he caught himself looking in his rearview mirror, watching Elena approach the next car with the same radiant smile she'd given him. For the rest of the drive to his office, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we deserve beautiful things too. That afternoon, Alexander did something he'd never done before. Instead of staying late at the office to review quarterly projections, he left at exactly 5:30 p.m. He told himself it was because he wanted to beat traffic, but deep down, he knew the real reason. He wanted to see if Elena would be at the traffic light on his way home. She was, and when she saw his BMW approaching, her face broke into that same radiant smile that had been haunting his thoughts all day. This time, Alexander rolled down his window before she even approached. How was your day with the roses? Elena asked, leaning slightly toward his car. Honestly, it was the first day in years that I actually noticed flowers existed, Alexander replied. What about you? Did you sell them all? Almost. Just 3 left, but that's okay. Tomorrow's a new day with new roses. Elena paused, then asked, Alexander, can I ask you something personal? Sure. What do you do that makes you look so serious all the time? Even when you're smiling, your eyes look like they're carrying something heavy. Alexander was taken aback by her perceptiveness. I'm a CEO. I run a tech company, and I guess I'm always thinking about the next problem to solve, the next crisis to prevent. That sounds exhausting, Elena said gently. When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. He couldn't remember. He literally could not remember the last time he'd done something purely for joy. I don't know, he admitted. Elena smiled, but this time it was softer, more understanding. Well, buying roses for me made me happy, so technically, you did something that made someone happy. That's a start, right? The light was about to change, but Alexander found himself not wanting this conversation to end. Elena, I know this might sound crazy, but would you like to have coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about what makes you happy. Elena's eyes widened in surprise. You want to have coffee with me? Very much. Alexander, I appreciate that, but I should tell you, I'm not looking for charity or a handout. I sell roses because I need the money, not because I need rescuing. I'm not offering charity, Alexander said quickly. I'm asking for coffee because in 2 conversations, you've made me think about things I haven't thought about in years. That's not charity. That's a gift. Elena studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine his sincerity. Finally, she smiled. Okay, Alexander Stone, coffee sounds nice, but I choose the place, and it has to be somewhere normal people go. Deal, Alexander said, just as the light turned green. Tomorrow, same time? Same time, Elena agreed. And Alexander, bring those roses. I want to see if they actually made you happy. The next morning, Alexander found himself doing something unprecedented. He woke up excited. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market projections. He was looking forward to seeing Elena. As his BMW approached the familiar intersection, Alexander spotted Elena setting up her usual corner. But today she wasn't alone. A small crowd had gathered around her, and as Alexander got closer, he could see why. Elena wasn't just selling roses. She was brightening everyone's day. She complimented an elderly man on his tie, told a stressed-looking woman that her smile was beautiful, and gave a free rose to a little girl who'd been watching wistfully from the sidewalk. When Elena saw Alexander's car approaching, she excused herself from her other customers and walked over with her characteristic bright smile. "Good morning, Alexander. How are those roses treating you?" Alexander glanced at the passenger seat, where the 4 roses from yesterday sat in a makeshift vase he'd created from a coffee mug. "They're still beautiful. And you were right. They do smell like happiness." Elena laughed, a sound that Alexander was quickly becoming addicted to. "See? I told you. Now about that coffee. I was thinking we could go after you finish here? I could wait." "Actually," Elena interrupted, "I have a better idea. There's this amazing little cafe called Sunrise about 6 blocks from here. They make the best coffee in the city, and the owner, Maria, is like a grandmother to everyone who walks in. How about we meet there at 10 a.m.? That'll give me time to finish my morning sales." Alexander nodded eagerly. "Sunrise Cafe at 10 a.m. I'll be there." As the light changed and Alexander drove away, he realized he had no idea what he was going to do for the next hour and a half. For a man whose every minute was usually accounted for, this was both terrifying and exhilarating. At exactly 10 a.m., Alexander walked into Sunrise Cafe. It was unlike any place he'd ever been. Mismatched chairs, local artwork on the walls, and the kind of warm, welcoming atmosphere that made you want to stay for hours. He spotted Elena immediately, sitting at a small table near the window, already nursing a cup of coffee and reading what looked like a textbook. "Studying?" Alexander asked as he approached her table. Elena looked up and smiled. "Business finance. I have a test next week, and I need to maintain my GPA if I want to keep my academic scholarship." Alexander sat down across from her, noting the way she'd organized her notes, the highlighted passages in her textbook, the careful handwriting in the margins. "What's your major?" "Business administration with a focus on social entrepreneurship," Elena replied. "I want to start a company that helps other first-generation college students navigate higher education while supporting their families." Alexander stared at her in amazement. That's incredible. How did you come up with that idea?" Elena's expression grew more serious. "Because I'm living it. My mom immigrated here from El Salvador when I was 5. She's worked 3 jobs my entire life just to keep us afloat, and when I got into college, we thought my financial aid would cover everything. But when my mom got sick last year and needed surgery, we fell behind on some payments, and my aid got reduced." She gestured toward the window, in the direction of her rose-selling corner. "So I sell roses in the morning before classes, work at the campus bookstore in the afternoons, and tutor high school kids in the evenings. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me in school and helps with mom's medical bills." Alexander felt something profound stirring in his chest, a mixture of admiration, respect, and something else he couldn't quite name. Here was this young woman, barely 22 years old, juggling more responsibilities than most people could handle, and she did it all with a smile that could light up the world. "Elena, you're incredible. I can't imagine managing all of that." Elena shrugged modestly. "You do what you have to do. Besides, every day I get to meet interesting people like grumpy CEOs who turn out to be much nicer than they look." "Grumpy?" Alexander protested with mock offense. "Oh, definitely grumpy. You should see your face when you're on those phone calls in your car. You look like you're ready to fire half the world." Alexander laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. "Maybe I am. Do you know how frustrating it is when grown adults can't figure out basic problem solving?" "Actually, yes, I do," Elena said, leaning forward with interest. "I tutor teenagers, remember? Want to know what I've learned about teaching people to solve problems." For the next hour, Alexander found himself in the most engaging conversation he'd had in years. Elena told him about her students, her innovative tutoring methods, her dreams for her future company. In return, Alexander found himself sharing stories about his business, his challenges, his successes, but more importantly, his doubts and frustrations. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said as they prepared to leave. "Why did you start your company? What was your original dream?" Alexander paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I wanted to create technology that would make people's lives better. I had this vision of developing tools that would democratize education, make learning accessible to everyone regardless of their economic background." "That's beautiful," Elena said softly. "So what happened to that vision?" "Investors happened. Market pressures happened. Growth targets happened." Alexander's voice grew more somber. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about making people's lives better and started thinking about making shareholders happy." Elena reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. It was the first time anyone had touched him with genuine warmth in longer than he could remember. "Alexander, what if I told you that the grumpy CEO I met yesterday and the passionate visionary sitting across from me right now are the same person? What if the only difference is that one of them forgot why he started this journey?" Alexander looked down at Elena's hand covering his. Her fingers were slightly stained with rose petal residue. Her nails were short and practical, and she wore no jewelry except for a simple silver ring that looked like it had been a gift from someone who loved her deeply. Everything about her hands spoke of work, of purpose, of a life lived with intention. "Elena, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. How do you stay so positive? How do you wake up every morning and face all these challenges with a smile? Aren't you exhausted? Aren't you frustrated that you have to work so hard just to get what other people take for granted?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "You know what I realized? Being angry about my circumstances wouldn't change them, but it would steal my joy. And joy is the one thing that's completely free. No one can take it away from me unless I let them." She paused, then continued. "Besides, I'm not just working toward a degree. I'm working toward a future where I can help other people in situations like mine. Every rose I sell, every hour I tutor, every page I study, it's all building toward something bigger than just me." Alexander felt something shift inside him, like a door opening in a room he'd forgotten existed. "You know, talking to you makes me remember why I fell in love with business in the first place." "And what was that?" "The possibility of creating something that matters. If stories like this remind you that success is about more than just money, and that real connections can happen in the most unexpected places, please hit that subscribe button. We share inspiring stories like Elena and Alexander's every week." Elena smiled, and Alexander noticed that her smile seemed to reach places in his heart that had been cold for a very long time. "Alexander, I need to get to class, but I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for buying my roses. But more than that, thank you for seeing me as more than just a girl selling flowers. Thank you for reminding me that there's a world outside my car windows," Alexander replied. "Elena, would you mind if we did this again? I promise I'm not trying to rescue you or change your life. I really enjoy talking with you." Elena gathered her books and stood up. "I'd like that. Same time tomorrow? Here at sunrise. It's a deal." As Elena walked toward the door, she turned back one more time. "Oh, and Alexander, bring different flowers tomorrow. I want to teach you about all the ways beauty shows up when you're actually paying attention." Over the next few weeks, Alexander's life began to change in ways he never could have anticipated. His morning meetings with Elena at the traffic light became the highlight of his day, and their coffee dates at Sunrise Cafe evolved into something that felt suspiciously like falling in love. Alexander learned that Elena preferred sunflowers to roses because they follow the light, that she made the best scrambled eggs in the world using a recipe her grandmother had taught her, and that she had a laugh that could make even his worst days feel manageable. Elena learned that Alexander had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he wasn't trying to be a CEO, that he'd once dreamed of being a teacher before technology called to him, and that he made excellent coffee but terrible toast. But with every passing day, the differences in their worlds became more apparent. Alexander lived in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city. Elena shared a tiny two-bedroom apartment with her mother in a neighborhood where the sirens never seemed to stop. Alexander's idea of a casual dinner was a restaurant where meals cost more than Elena made in a week selling roses. Elena's idea of a perfect evening was cooking dinner with her mom and watching old movies on their ancient television. The disconnect became impossible to ignore when Alexander suggested they have dinner at Chez Laurent, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. "Alexander, I can't afford to eat at places like that," Elena said gently during one of their morning coffee meetings. "I would pay, of course," Alexander replied, not understanding why Elena's expression suddenly grew distant. "That's exactly the problem," Elena said quietly. "I can't be in a relationship where one person always pays because the other person can't afford to participate." Alexander felt confused and frustrated. "But Elena, I want to share these experiences with you. I want to take you nice places, buy you beautiful things." "Why?" Elena interrupted. "So I can get used to a lifestyle I'll never be able to maintain on my own? So I can become dependent on your generosity." "No, that's not what I meant. Alexander, listen to me carefully. I like you. I really genuinely like you. But I won't be anyone's charity case. And I won't be with someone who thinks my worth is determined by how much he can spend on me." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, realizing he'd stepped into territory he didn't understand. "Elena, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I've never been with someone who didn't want me to spend money on them." "What kind of relationships have you been in?" Elena asked, her voice softer now. Alexander thought about his past relationships, mostly with women who moved in his social circles, women who expected expensive gifts and lavish dates as proof of his affection. Honestly, shallow ones. Relationships where money was the language of love. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "Alexander, if you want to be with me, you need to understand something. I don't need you to save me or upgrade my life. I need you to respect the life I've built and the person I've become because of my struggles, not in spite of them." "I do respect you," Alexander said earnestly. "Elena, you're the strongest, most impressive person I've ever met. You're working 3 jobs, maintaining perfect grades, taking care of your mother, and somehow still finding time to make other people's days brighter. I don't want to change any of that. I want to learn from it." Elena squeezed his hand. "Then learn by walking in my world sometimes, instead of always trying to bring me into yours." That evening, Alexander did something he'd never done before. He took the subway to Elena's neighborhood and knocked on her apartment door, carrying a bag of groceries and a bouquet of sunflowers he'd bought from a corner market. Elena opened the door in surprise. "Alexander, what are you doing here? You said you wanted me to walk in your world sometimes. So I'm here, with ingredients for dinner, hoping you'll teach me how to make those famous scrambled eggs." Elena's mother, Rosa, appeared behind her daughter. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair, wearing a floral house dress and an expression of curious concern. "Mommy, this is Alexander," Elena said in Spanish, then switched to English. "Alexander, this is my mother, Rosa." Alexander stepped forward and, drawing on his high school Spanish, said carefully, "Yes, un placer conocerla, Señora Martinez. Elena habla de usted todo el tiempo." Rosa's face broke into a warm smile, and she responded in rapid Spanish before turning to Elena and speaking in a tone that clearly indicated approval. "What did she say?" Alexander asked. Elena blushed. "She said you have good manners and kind eyes, and she wants to know if you're hungry because she just made too much rice and beans." For the next 3 hours, Alexander sat in the tiny kitchen of Elena's apartment, learning to cook from Rosa while Elena translated and teased him about his inability to properly flip an egg. He helped wash dishes in a sink that barely fit 2 plates, listened to Rosa tell stories about Elena's childhood in a mixture of Spanish and English, and felt more at home than he'd ever felt in his penthouse. As the evening wound down, Elena walked Alexander to the subway station. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they stood on the platform waiting for his train. "For coming here, for meeting my mom, for not acting like our apartment was too small or our neighborhood was too rough. Elena, your home is filled with more love and warmth than my penthouse has ever had. Your mother is incredible, and watching you with her, I've never seen anyone care for someone else the way you care for her." Elena stood on her tiptoes and kissed Alexander softly, right there on the subway platform with the sound of the approaching train growing louder. "I'm falling in love with you, Alexander Stone," she whispered against his lips. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll never try to save me from my life. Promise me that you'll love me as I am, where I am, not as who you think I could become if you fixed everything." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that surprised them both. "Elena Martinez, I don't want to save you from your life. I want you to save me from mine." As Alexander's train pulled into the station, he realized that for the first time in his adult life, he didn't want to go home to his perfectly appointed penthouse. He wanted to stay in Elena's world, where love was measured in homemade meals and hand-washed dishes and laughter that echoed off cramped apartment walls. But it was also the moment he began to understand that loving Elena meant more than just appreciating her world. It meant figuring out how to bridge the gap between their two realities without asking either of them to give up who they were. The question was whether that was actually possible. 2 months into their relationship, the differences between Alexander and Elena's worlds began to create cracks that even love couldn't seem to bridge. The crisis started on a Thursday morning when Elena didn't show up at her usual corner. Alexander waited through 3 light cycles, growing increasingly concerned. Elena had never missed a morning without texting him first. When she finally appeared the next day, Alexander could see that something was wrong. Elena's usual radiant smile was forced, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Elena, what happened yesterday? I was worried about you." "I'm sorry," Elena said, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. "I had to take my mom to the emergency room. Her diabetes spiked, and we spent 14 hours at the hospital." Alexander's heart clenched. "Is she okay? Why didn't you call me? I could have helped." "Helped how?" Elena asked, and there was an edge to her voice that Alexander had never heard before. "Would you have paid the hospital bill? The prescription costs? The follow-up appointment fees?" "Elena, yes, of course I would have. And that's exactly the problem," Elena interrupted. "Alexander, yesterday I sat in that hospital watching my mother be in pain, knowing that every hour we were there was costing money we don't have, and all I could think about was calling you to fix it. Do you know how that made me feel?" Alexander was quiet, sensing that he was walking into dangerous territory. "It made me feel weak," Elena continued. "It made me feel like I was becoming the kind of person who looks for someone else to solve her problems instead of figuring it out herself. But Elena, if I can help, why is that a bad thing? People who care about each other help each other. Because there's a difference between helping and enabling, Alexander. There's a difference between being supported and being rescued." Their conversation was interrupted by the light changing, but the tension followed them to their coffee date later that morning. "Elena, I don't understand what you want from me," Alexander said as they sat in their usual booth at Sunrise Cafe. "When I offer to help with money, you get upset. When I don't offer, I feel like I'm being selfish and uncaring. What am I supposed to do?" Elena stared into her coffee cup for a long moment before answering. "Alexander, can I tell you about my father?" Alexander nodded, sensing this was important. "My father left when I was 8. He was a good man. He loved my mother. He loved me. But he couldn't handle the stress of being poor in America. He couldn't handle feeling like he wasn't providing for his family the way he thought a man should. So one day he just left." Elena's voice grew softer. "My mother spent years blaming herself, wondering if she'd been too proud, if she'd made it too hard for him to help us. And I grew up watching her work herself to exhaustion trying to prove that she didn't need anyone." Alexander began to understand where this was going. "Elena, I'm not your father. I'm not going to leave because things are difficult. But you don't understand, Alexander. When I start depending on your money to solve my problems, I stop being the person you fell in love with. I become someone who needs rescuing instead of someone who finds solutions. That's not how I see you. But it's how I'll start seeing myself," Elena said firmly. "Alexander, yesterday at the hospital, I found myself calculating how much easier everything would be if I just let you take care of me. And that thought terrified me more than any medical bill ever could." Alexander reached across the table for Elena's hand, but she pulled away gently. Elena, what if we found a different way? What if instead of me just giving you money, we figured out solutions together? What if I invested in your tutoring business or helped you get a better paying job at my company? Alexander, stop. Elena's voice was quiet but firm. Listen to what you're saying. Every solution you're proposing involves you using your resources to fix my problems. That's not partnership. That's charity with a prettier name. Alexander felt frustration building in his chest. So what am I supposed to do? Just watch you struggle when I have the means to help? Is loving you supposed to mean standing by while you exhaust yourself working 3 jobs? Maybe, Elena said quietly. Maybe loving me means trusting that I'm strong enough to handle my own life, even when it's hard. But what about loving you meaning I want to make your life easier? Elena looked up at him with eyes full of sadness. Alexander, I think that's where we're fundamentally different. You show love by solving problems. I need love that respects my ability to solve my own problems. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. Elena, are you saying this isn't going to work? Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena reached across the table and took his hand this time, holding it gently. Alexander, I'm saying that I love you too much to let this relationship turn me into someone I don't recognize. And I love you too much to ask you to watch me struggle when every instinct you have tells you to fix it. So what does that mean? Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. It means that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes 2 people can be perfect for each other and still be wrong for each other. Alexander felt something breaking inside his chest. Elena, please, we can figure this out. We can find a way. Alexander, you're doing it again. You're trying to solve this like it's a business problem. But this isn't about finding the right strategy or the right approach. This is about the fact that we see the world fundamentally differently. Elena stood up from the table, gathering her books. I need some time to think, and I think you do too. Alexander watched the woman he'd fallen in love with walk out of the cafe, and for the first time since he'd become a CEO, he faced a problem that couldn't be solved with money, strategy, or determination. Could only be solved by accepting that sometimes love meant letting go. 3 weeks passed without Elena appearing at the traffic light. Alexander continued to drive through the intersection every morning and evening, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but the corner where she used to sell roses remained empty. On a cold Friday morning in November, Alexander finally saw someone at Elena's usual spot. But it wasn't Elena. It was a different young woman, older, selling coffee and pastries from a small cart. Alexander rolled down his window and called out to her. Excuse me, do you know what happened to the girl who used to sell roses here? The woman approached his car. Elena? Yeah, I know her. She got a scholarship or something. Full ride to finish her degree. She doesn't need to sell roses anymore. The woman paused, studying Alexander's face. You're the guy in the BMW, aren't you? The one she used to talk about. Alexander's heart skipped. She talked about me? All the time. She said you were a good man who was trying to love her the wrong way. The woman shrugged. I don't know what that means, but she seemed pretty sad about it. That evening, Alexander found himself back at Sunrise Cafe, sitting alone in the booth where he and Elena used to meet. He was nursing his 3rd cup of coffee when someone slid into the seat across from him. You look like a man who's lost something important. Alexander looked up to see a woman in her early 30s with short auburn hair and kind green eyes. She wore scrubs and had the tired but compassionate look of someone who worked in healthcare. I'm sorry, do I know you? Alexander asked. Not yet, but I feel like I know you. I'm Sarah Chun, and I'm a nurse at City General Hospital. I worked with Elena's mother a few weeks ago when she was admitted for her diabetes. Alexander straightened up. Is Rosa okay? She's fine now, thanks to Elena's quick thinking and good care. But Elena mentioned you while we were talking. She said you were someone who meant a lot to her, but that things were complicated. Sarah signaled to the waitress for a coffee. Mind if I ask what happened? Elena seemed really conflicted about whatever was going on between you two. Alexander found himself telling Sarah the entire story. Their meeting at the traffic light, their growing relationship, the fundamental disconnect about money and independence, and Elena's decision to step away. She said I was trying to love her the wrong way, Alexander concluded. But I don't understand how wanting to help someone you care about can be wrong. Sarah listened thoughtfully, then asked, Alexander, can I tell you something about Elena that might help you understand? Alexander nodded eagerly. When Elena's mother was in the hospital, Elena never left her side. She slept in an uncomfortable chair, ate vending machine food, and took time off from all her jobs. The nurses kept offering her things: pillows, better food, phone chargers, and she turned down almost everything. Sarah paused to take a sip of her coffee. But here's what was interesting. She accepted help when it was offered as an equal exchange. When I offered to show her how to monitor her mother's blood sugar at home, she accepted immediately and taught me some Spanish phrases in return. When another nurse offered to connect her with a support group for families dealing with diabetes, Elena accepted and offered to help translate for other Spanish-speaking families. Alexander began to see where this was going. Elena doesn't want to be saved, Alexander. She wants to be seen as capable and strong. She wants partnerships, not rescues. But I do see her as capable and strong, Alexander protested. Do you? Or do you see her as capable and strong, but still needing your help to reach her full potential? The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. Is that how he'd been seeing Elena? As someone amazing who just needed the right support to become even more amazing? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. I think I was seeing her as someone who deserved better than what she had, rather than someone who was already building something beautiful with what she had. Sarah nodded. That's a very honest answer, and it explains why Elena felt like you were trying to love her the wrong way. So what's the right way? Alexander asked desperately. I don't know, Sarah admitted, but I suspect it starts with loving who she is now, where she is now, rather than loving who she could become with your help. Alexander stared into his coffee, feeling like he was seeing his relationship with Elena clearly for the first time. I think I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. Maybe, Sarah said gently, or maybe you learned something important that will help you love better in the future. 2 months later, Alexander was working late in his office when his assistant knocked on his door. Mr. Stone, there's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Elena Martinez, and she has a business proposal. Alexander's heart nearly stopped. Send her in, please. Elena walked into his office wearing a professional black dress, carrying a leather portfolio, and radiating the same confidence that had first drawn him to her at the traffic light. But there was something different about her now, a sense of purpose and accomplishment that seemed to glow from within. Hello, Alexander, Elena said, extending her hand for a professional handshake. Elena. Alexander stood and shook her hand, trying to ignore the electricity that shot through him at her touch. You look incredible, successful. Elena smiled, and Alexander's heart ached at how beautiful she was. Thank you. I wanted to come here to tell you about something exciting, and to thank you. Thank me. Sit down, Alexander. I have a story to tell you. They sat across from each other in Alexander's office, and Elena opened her portfolio. After things ended between us, I did a lot of thinking about what you'd said about my tutoring business having potential. Not the part about you investing in it, Elena clarified quickly, but the part about it actually being a viable business model. Elena pulled out a folder filled with documents. So I applied for a small business grant through the university. I wrote a business plan, did market research, developed a curriculum. And Alexander, I won. Alexander felt pride and admiration swelling in his chest. Elena, that's incredible. It gets better. The grant was enough for me to hire 2 other students and rent a small space near campus. We've been operating for 6 weeks now, and we're already at capacity. We're helping 43 students, and we have a waiting list. Elena's eyes were bright with excitement as she continued. But here's the best part. Remember how you talked about using technology to democratize education? Well, I've been working with the computer science department to develop an app that matches students who need tutoring with student tutors in their area. It's like a rideshare app, but for education. Alexander leaned forward, fascinated. Elena, that's brilliant. That could scale nationally, internationally even. I know. And that's why I'm here. Elena took a deep breath. Alexander, I want to pitch you on an investment opportunity. Not as someone you used to date, not as someone you want to help, but as a legitimate business opportunity. Alexander stared at her in amazement. You want me to invest in your company? I want you to consider investing in my company. I've done my research, Alexander. Your firm has a venture capital arm that focuses on educational technology. My business fits perfectly with your investment criteria, and I think it could be profitable. Elena slid a bound business plan across his desk. This proposal outlines a partnership where your firm would provide funding and business expertise, and my team would provide the product development and market insight. It's a real partnership, Alexander. Not a rescue. Alexander picked up the business plan, and as he flipped through it, he realized he was looking at some of the most innovative and well-researched work he'd seen in years. Elena, this is exceptional work. The market analysis, the revenue projections, the growth strategy, this is professional-grade business planning. I learned from the best, Elena said with a small smile. Those morning conversations we had about business weren't just coffee talk for me. I was taking notes. Alexander set down the business plan and looked directly at Elena. Before I respond to this as a businessman, I need to say something as someone who cares about you. Elena nodded. I'm sorry, Elena. I'm sorry for trying to fix your life instead of celebrating it. I'm sorry for seeing your struggles as problems to solve instead of seeing your strength in handling them. And I'm sorry for loving the idea of who you could become instead of loving who you already were. Elena's eyes softened. Alexander, I'm sorry too. I'm sorry for not explaining better what I needed. I'm sorry for walking away instead of fighting for us. And I'm sorry for making you feel like caring about me was wrong. They sat in silence for a moment, years of love and regret hanging in the air between them. Elena, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy? Really, genuinely happy? Elena's face broke into that radiant smile that Alexander had fallen in love with. Alexander, I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm building something I believe in. I'm supporting my family. I'm finishing my degree, and I'm doing it all on my own terms. I wake up every morning excited about what I'm creating. That's all I ever wanted for you, Alexander said quietly. I know, and that's why I knew you'd be the right person to approach about this investment opportunity. Because you want to see me succeed, not just as someone you cared about, but because you recognize good business when you see it. Alexander smiled. Elena Martinez, I would like to schedule a formal pitch meeting with you and my investment team. And I'd like to tell you right now that based on what I've seen, I think you're going to get funding. Elena's smile could have powered the entire city. Really? Really? You've built something extraordinary, Elena, and you did it exactly the way you said you would, on your own terms, with your own strength, creating your own success. As Elena gathered her materials to leave, Alexander couldn't help but ask, Elena, do you think there might be room in your life for an old friend? Someone who's learned a lot about love and partnership over the past few months. Elena paused at the door and turned back to him. Alexander, I think there might be room in my life for someone who sees me as an equal partner in building something beautiful together. Someone who wants to grow alongside me instead of trying to grow me up. I'd like to be that someone if you'll have me. Elena walked back to Alexander's desk and extended her hand. Partners. Alexander shook her hand, but this time, instead of letting go, he brought it to his lips and kissed it gently. Partners. In business and in life if you'll have me. I'll have you, Alexander Stone. But this time we build something together. This time we love each other as we are, not as we could be. As Elena left his office, Alexander realized that he hadn't just gotten a second chance at love. He'd gotten a second chance at becoming the kind of person who deserved love. The kind of person who could be a true partner to someone as extraordinary as Elena Martinez. 6 months later, at the launch party for EDU Connect, the app that Elena's company had developed with Alexander's investment firm. Elena stood in front of a room full of investors, educators, and students. This app exists because someone taught me that the best partnerships aren't about one person lifting the other up, Elena said, her eyes finding Alexander's in the crowd. The best partnerships are about two people choosing to grow stronger together. Alexander raised his glass in a toast, and as Elena continued her speech, he realized that sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who inspires you to become complete yourself. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to build something beautiful together along the way. If you made it this far, you believe in the power of second chances and real partnership in love. Elena and Alexander's story reminds us that the best relationships aren't about rescuing or being rescued. They're about two whole people choosing to build something beautiful together. Drop a comment and let us know. Have you ever had to learn how to love someone better? Have you experienced a relationship where you grew stronger together rather than just being saved by someone else? Share your story. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe that true love is about seeing and celebrating people as they are, not as they could be, leave a comment saying love is partnership, so this community knows we're all committed to building relationships based on mutual respect and shared growth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more real stories about love, growth, and second chances that remind us that the best fairy tales are the ones we write ourselves. Until next time, remember, the right person won't try to save you, they'll want to build something amazing with you.